Eleanor Grayson stood at the edge of her sprawling estate, the wind tugging at her silver hair as she gazed at the home she had built with her husband, Charles, over 5 decades. The mansion, with its ivy-clad walls and towering oaks, was more than brick and mortar. It was a monument to their shared dreams, their triumphs, their love. Or so she had believed. At 72, Eleanor's elegance was undimmed, her posture as straight as the day she walked down the aisle. But today, her heart was a storm, and her hands trembled with a fury she hadn't known she could still feel. It had been 3 days since Charles, now 75, had sat her down in their oak-paneled study and confessed. His words were clinical, detached, as if he were discussing a business deal rather than dismantling their life. "Eleanor, I've met someone," he'd said, his voice steady, his eyes avoiding hers. "Her name is Vanessa. She's younger. I've asked her to move into the lake house." The lake house, their sanctuary, where they'd spent summers with their children, where Eleanor had painted watercolors of the sunrise, where Charles had proposed to her all those years ago under a canopy of stars. The betrayal wasn't just in his affair, it was in his audacity to install his mistress in a place so sacred. Eleanor had listened in silence, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of composure. But inside, something ancient and fierce was waking. She didn't cry. Not then. Not later. Instead, she waited. Charles left for a business trip the next morning, his suitcase packed with the arrogance of a man who thought he could rewrite their story without consequence. Eleanor, however, had other plans. She wasn't the fragile flower he'd mistaken her for. She was the architect of their empire, the woman who'd turned his reckless investments into a fortune, who'd managed their properties, their legacy. Every deed, every key, every lock bore her touch. And she would use that power now. By noon, Eleanor was on the phone with her lawyer, Margaret, a sharp-witted woman who'd been her confidant for decades. "I want every lock changed," Eleanor said, her voice low but unyielding. "Every property in his name, every door he thinks he can walk through. The lake house, the penthouse, the vineyard, the cabin in Aspen, every single one." Margaret didn't hesitate. "Consider it done." "But, Eleanor, are you sure? This is bold." Eleanor's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. "He moved his mistress into our lake house. Margaret, I'm not just sure. I'm certain." The first locksmith arrived at the lake house that afternoon. Eleanor drove there herself, her vintage Mercedes gliding along the winding roads. The house sat serene against the water, its white shutters gleaming in the sunlight. But inside, Vanessa's presence was already a stain. Her perfume lingered in the air, her clothes draped carelessly over furniture that Eleanor had chosen with love. The locksmith, a burly man named Tom, worked quickly, his tools clinking as he replaced the heavy brass locks. Eleanor watched, her heart pounding with a strange mix of vindication and grief. "Do you want the old keys?" Tom asked, holding up a small pile of gleaming metal. "No," Eleanor said. "Melt them down. I want nothing left of what was." By evening, the lake house was sealed, its new keys tucked safely in Eleanor's purse. She didn't stop there. Over the next 2 days, she orchestrated a symphony of locksmiths across their properties. The penthouse in the city, with its panoramic views of the skyline, was next. Then the vineyard in Napa, where she and Charles had celebrated their 40th anniversary. The cabin in Aspen, the beach house in Malibu. Each one was locked tight, a fortress against Charles's betrayal. Eleanor moved with precision, her anger a quiet fire that burned hotter with every call, every confirmation. She didn't tell Charles. Let him discover it. She thought. Let him stand at the door of his precious lake house and realize he was locked out of his own life. The thought brought her a fleeting satisfaction, but it couldn't drown the ache in her chest. 50 years of marriage. 3 children. 7 grandchildren. Countless memories, and yet here she was, rewriting the locks to keep her husband out. On the 3rd day, Eleanor sat in her garden, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in her hands. The roses she'd planted decades ago were in full bloom, their scent a reminder of gentler times. She wondered if she'd gone too far. Was this vengeance? Or justice? Did it matter? Charles had broken their vows, desecrated their shared history. She had every right to protect what was hers. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Charles. Eleanor. What the hell is going on? The lake house keys don't work. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the reply button. 1,000 words surged to her fingertips: anger, hurt, accusations. But she typed nothing. Instead, she set the phone down and sipped her tea, letting the silence speak for her. Charles's texts grew more frantic over the next few hours, each one a sharp jab at Eleanor's resolve. The penthouse too. What are you doing? Eleanor. Call me. She didn't. She let the messages pile up, each one a brick in the wall she was building between them. By evening, he'd stopped texting and started calling. She let the calls go to voicemail, his voice a distant echo of the man she'd once loved. Eleanor wasn't idle. She spent the day at the estate, sorting through decades of documents in the study. The room smelled of old leather and polished wood, a space where she and Charles had once planned their future. Now, it was her war room. She pulled out every deed, every contract, every financial record tied to their properties. Charles might have been the face of their empire, but Eleanor was its backbone. She knew every detail, every loophole, and she was ready to use them. Her daughter, Claire, arrived that afternoon, her face a mix of concern and confusion. At 45, Claire was a successful architect, her life a testament to the stability Eleanor had fought to provide. Mom, what's going on? Claire asked, settling into a chair across from Eleanor. Dad called me, ranting about locks and properties. He says you've gone mad. Eleanor's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. Mad. No, darling. I'm perfectly sane. Your father moved his mistress into the lake house. I'm simply reasserting my boundaries. Claire's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. He did what? Oh, Mom, I had no idea. How could he? Eleanor shrugged, though the gesture felt heavy. He's made his choice, and I've made mine. Claire reached for her hand, her grip warm and steady. What are you going to do? This, changing the locks, it's bold, but it's not a plan. It's a start, Eleanor said. I'm not just locking him out of buildings, Claire. I'm locking him out of the life he took for granted. But I need to be smart about this. I need to protect what's ours, yours, your brother's, the grandchildren's. Claire nodded, her architect's mind already turning. You need to secure the assets legally. Dad's not going to take this lying down. He'll fight you. Let him, Eleanor said, her voice steel. I've been preparing for this longer than he knows. That evening, Eleanor met with Margaret again, this time at a quiet cafe in town. Margaret brought a thick folder of documents, new contracts, revised ownership agreements, and a plan to transfer key assets into a trust for the children. This will protect the estate and the other properties, Margaret explained. Charles can't touch them if they're no longer in his name. Eleanor scanned the papers, her mind sharp despite the emotional weight. and the lake house. Margaret hesitated. It's trickier. You both own it jointly. Changing the locks was a statement, but he could challenge it in court. Then let's make sure he has nothing to challenge. Eleanor said. I want it in my name alone. Margaret raised an eyebrow. That's a tall order. Eleanor. It'll take time. And he'll notice. Good. Eleanor said. I want him to notice. As the days passed, Eleanor's actions rippled through their social circle. Friends called, some offering support, others fishing for gossip. Eleanor deflected them all with her trademark grace. But the whispers grew louder. Charles, it seemed, was spinning his own narrative, painting Eleanor as vindictive, unhinged. She heard the rumors through Claire, she's lost it. Menopause madness at 72. Eleanor laughed when Claire told her. A sharp, bitter sound. Let them talk. She'd spent a lifetime being the perfect wife, the gracious hostess. Now, she was done playing the part. On the 5th day, Charles showed up at the estate. Eleanor saw his car pull into the driveway from her bedroom window, her heart lurching despite herself. He looked older, smaller, as he stepped out, his suit rumpled, his face drawn. She met him at the front door, the new lock gleaming like a challenge. Eleanor, what is this? He demanded, holding up a key that no longer worked. You've locked me out of everything. Our home, our life, what are you trying to prove? She studied him, the man she'd loved for half a century. His eyes were still blue, still piercing, but they held no remorse, only indignation. I'm not proving anything, Charles, she said. I'm protecting what's mine. You made your choice when you moved Vanessa into our lake house. His jaw tightened. Vanessa is. She's different. She makes me feel alive again. Eleanor's chest ached, but her voice remained steady. And I kept you alive for 50 years. But that wasn't enough, was it? He opened his mouth, then closed it, his hands clenching at his sides. For a moment, she thought he might apologize, might beg for forgiveness. But he turned and walked back to his car, leaving her standing alone in the doorway. The weeks that followed were a chess game, each move calculated, each counter-move anticipated. Eleanor worked tirelessly with Margaret to fortify her position. The trust was established, shielding the bulk of their wealth from Charles's reach. The vineyard, the penthouse, and the cabin were now untouchable, their titles secured in the names of Claire and her brothers, Michael and James. The lake house remained a battleground, its joint ownership a legal knot that Margaret was still unraveling. Charles, predictably, didn't sit idle. He hired a lawyer, a slick man named Richard who sent Eleanor a barrage of letters demanding access to the properties. Eleanor read each one with a calm detachment, her resolve hardening. She wasn't fighting for spite, she was fighting for dignity, for the legacy she'd built, for the family she'd held together while Charles chased his fleeting youth. Her children rallied around her. Michael, the eldest at 48, flew in from Chicago, his quiet strength a balm to Eleanor's frayed nerves. James, the youngest, called daily from London, his voice crackling with outrage on her behalf. He's lost his mind, Mom, James said. But we've got your back. Their support was a lifeline, but it couldn't erase the loneliness that crept in at night. Eleanor would sit in her bedroom, the silence heavy, and wonder where she'd gone wrong. Had she been too accommodating, too trusting? Had she missed the signs of Charles's discontent? The questions gnawed at her, but she pushed them aside. There was no time for self-pity, she had a war to win. One morning, Eleanor received a call from Vanessa. The younger woman's voice was soft, almost apologetic. Mrs. Grayson, I didn't mean for this to happen, she said. I didn't know about the lake house. What it meant to you. Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. You're living in my home. Vanessa, you knew exactly what you were doing. There was a pause. Then a sigh. I love him. Mrs. Grayson, I know you don't want to hear that, but it's true. He's not the man you think he is anymore. Eleanor's laugh was sharp, cutting. And you think you know him? After a few months. I've known him for 50 years. You're a distraction. Nothing more. She hung up before Vanessa could respond, her heart racing. The audacity of the call. The presumption it fueled her fire. That afternoon, she drove to the lake house again, this time with Claire. The new locks gleamed, a silent testament to her resolve. But inside, Vanessa's presence lingered. Photos on the mantel, a scarf draped over a chair. Eleanor's chest tightened, but she refused to let it break her. Let's clear it out, Claire said, her voice firm. This is your house, Mom, not hers. They spent hours packing Vanessa's belongings into boxes, each item a small victory. Clothes, jewelry, books. Eleanor handled them with care, not out of kindness, but because she refused to stoop to pettiness. When they were done, she had the boxes delivered to Charles's hotel, along with a note, your things are no longer welcome here. Charles's response came swiftly, in the form of a lawsuit. Richard, his lawyer, filed a claim accusing Eleanor of illegally restricting access to jointly owned properties. Margaret was unfazed. He's grasping at straws, she said. The locks were a bold move, but they're not illegal. We'll counter with a petition to dissolve the joint ownership of the lake house. Eleanor nodded, but the weight of the lawsuit pressed on her. She wasn't afraid of losing, she was afraid of what this fight was doing to her family. Claire, Michael, and James were united, but she saw the strain in their eyes, the worry that their parents' war would tear apart the foundation of their childhood. That night, Eleanor sat with Claire in the garden, the stars bright above them. Am I doing the right thing? She asked, her voice softer than usual. This vengeance, is it worth it? Claire took her hand, her grip fierce. You're not doing this for vengeance, Mom. You're doing it for us. For the family. Dad made his choice, and now you're making yours. Don't doubt yourself. Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand, grateful for the anchor. But as she looked up at the stars, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Charles wasn't done fighting, and neither was she. The lawsuit became the talk of their social circle, a scandal that fueled dinner party conversations and whispered exchanges at the country club. Eleanor felt the weight of their judgment, but she held her head high. She'd spent a lifetime cultivating grace under pressure, and she wouldn't falter now. Still, the whispers stung. She's too old to be this vindictive. She should let him go. Eleanor ignored them, focusing instead on the legal battle ahead. Margaret was a force, her strategy meticulous. She argued that Charles's actions constituted a breach of their marital agreement, justifying Eleanor's measures to protect her interests. The lake house, she contended, was as much Eleanor's as it was Charles's, and his unilateral decision to move Vanessa in was a violation of their shared history. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, seemed sympathetic but reserved judgment. Charles, meanwhile, played the victim. He appeared at hearings in tailored suits, his face a mask of wounded dignity. Vanessa was often at his side, her youth a stark contrast to Eleanor's elegance. The sight of them together was a knife to Eleanor's heart, but she refused to let it show. She sat in the courtroom, her posture impeccable, her eyes fixed on the judge. Let Charles perform. She knew the truth. And so did her children. One evening, after a particularly grueling hearing, Eleanor found herself at the lake house again. It was empty now, Vanessa's belongings gone, but the space felt hollow. She wandered through the rooms, her fingers trailing over the furniture, the memories flooding back. She remembered teaching Claire to swim in the lake, Michael's laughter as he chased fireflies, James's quiet evenings reading by the fireplace. This was her home, her heart, and Charles had tried to take it from her. She sank into a chair, her resolve wavering for the first time. Was this worth it? The lawsuits, the fights, the fractured family. She thought of her grandchildren, of the legacy she wanted to leave them. Not just wealth, but strength, dignity, the courage to stand up for what was right. She straightened, her decision reaffirmed. This wasn't just about her, it was about showing her family that betrayal didn't have to break them. The next day, Eleanor met with her children at the estate. Michael and James had flown in, their presence a reminder of what she was fighting for. "We need to talk about the future," she said, her voice steady. "This fight with your father, it's not just about the properties. It's about what we stand for as a family." Michael nodded, his jaw tight. "He's trying to rewrite our history. Mom, you're right to fight him." James, always the quieter one, spoke up. "But what happens after? If you win, what then? Do we just move on?" Eleanor looked at her sons, her heart swelling with pride and pain. "We rebuild," she said. "Not the way things were, but something stronger, something that's ours." The conversation shifted to practicality, show to manage the trust, how to ensure the grandchildren's futures. But beneath it all was a shared resolve, a determination to protect their legacy. Eleanor felt a spark of hope, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. A week later, Margaret called with news. "The judge is leaning in our favor," she said. "She's considering a temporary injunction to keep Charles out of the lake house until the ownership dispute is resolved. It's not a win yet, but it's close." Eleanor exhaled, the tension easing slightly. "And the other properties?" "Safe," Margaret said. "The trust is ironclad. Charles can't touch them." It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Eleanor celebrated quietly, pouring herself a glass of wine from the vineyard they'd once shared. She toasted to herself, to her children, to the strength she'd found in the face of betrayal. But the war wasn't over. Charles was still out there, plotting his next move, and Eleanor knew she had to stay one step ahead. The injunction came through, a legal barrier that kept Charles out of the lake house. Eleanor felt a surge of triumph, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was only a skirmish in a larger battle. Charles's lawyer filed an appeal, and the media caught wind of the story, splashing headlines across tabloids and local papers. "Millionaire's wife locks him out in bitter divorce battle." Eleanor avoided the newsstands, but the stories found her anyway, carried by well-meaning friends and nosy acquaintances. She focused on what she could control. The estate became her headquarters, a place where she could strategize and rebuild. She spent hours with her children, planning not just for the legal fight, but for the future. Claire suggested turning the lake house into a family retreat, a place for the grandchildren to create new memories. Michael proposed a foundation to support women facing betrayal, a way to turn Eleanor's pain into purpose. James, ever practical, focused on the finances, ensuring their wealth was secure. But the fight took its toll. Eleanor's energy waned, her nights plagued by restless dreams of Charles and Vanessa, of the life she'd lost. She confided in Margaret one evening, her voice low. "I thought this would feel better," she admitted. the locks, the lawsuits. I thought they'd make me whole again. But I just feel empty. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes kind but firm. You're not fighting for revenge, Eleanor. You're fighting for yourself. That emptiness. It's the space where you get to rebuild who you are. Eleanor nodded, but the words felt distant. She missed Charles, not the man who'd betrayed her, but the one who'd held her hand through labor, who'd danced with her at their children's weddings, who'd promised her forever. That man was gone, and she was grieving him as much as she was fighting him. One afternoon, Claire convinced Eleanor to visit the lake house. You need to see it, Mom, she said. Not as a battlefield, but as yours again. They walked through the house together, the rooms now stripped of Vanessa's presence. Eleanor paused at the window overlooking the lake, the water shimmering in the sunlight. This was our place, she said softly. How do I make it mine again? Claire smiled, her eyes bright with ideas. We'll redecorate. New colors. New furniture. We'll make it a place for us, for you. For me. For the kids. Dad doesn't get to define it anymore. Eleanor felt a spark of possibility. She spent the next few weeks transforming the lake house, choosing vibrant colors that reflected her strength rather than her sorrow. She hung new artwork, pieces by local artists that spoke of resilience and hope. The grandchildren came to help, their laughter filling the rooms with life. For the first time in months, Eleanor felt like she was building something, not just tearing it down. But Charles wasn't done. He appeared at the estate one morning, unannounced, his face a mask of barely contained anger. You're destroying everything we built, he said, his voice low and dangerous. This isn't you, Eleanor. You're not this cruel. She faced him, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Cruel. You brought another woman into our home. Charles. You broke us. I'm just picking up the pieces. He stared at her, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of the man she'd loathed, a man who might have regretted his choices. But then his eyes hardened, and he turned away. This isn't over, he said before leaving. Eleanor watched him go, her resolve unshaken. She wasn't fighting for cruelty, she was fighting for her right to exist, to reclaim the life she'd built. And she was closer than ever to winning. The final court date arrived 6 months after Eleanor had changed the first lock. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Eleanor sat beside Margaret, her children behind her, their presence a quiet strength. Charles sat across the room, Vanessa at his side, their hands clasped tightly. Eleanor didn't look at them. She focused on the judge, her heart steady despite the stakes. The judge's ruling was clear and measured. The lake house would be transferred to Eleanor's sole ownership, given Charles's breach of their marital agreement. The other properties, already secured in the trust, were untouchable. Charles's appeal was denied, his claims dismissed. Eleanor exhaled, the weight of months lifting slightly. It wasn't a complete victory. Divorce proceedings loomed, and the emotional scars would linger, but it was a triumph of will, of dignity. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, their questions a barrage. Eleanor ignored them, her arm linked with Claire's as they walked to the car. Charles lingered on the steps, his face pale, Vanessa clinging to him. For a moment, their eyes met, and Eleanor saw something she hadn't expected: defeat. Not just legal, but personal. Charles looked like a man who'd lost more than property. That evening, Eleanor hosted a dinner at the lake house. The table was set with her mother's china, the rooms filled with the laughter of her children and grandchildren. They toasted to new beginnings, to resilience, to family. Eleanor looked around, her heart full despite the pain of the past months. This was her legacy, not the properties, not the wealth, but the love and strength that bound them together. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor threw herself into her new life. She launched the foundation Michael had suggested, funding programs for women rebuilding after betrayal. She traveled with her grandchildren, their adventures a reminder that life could still surprise her. The lake house became a haven, a place where her family gathered, where new memories were forged. Charles faded into the background, his life with Vanessa a footnote in Eleanor's story. She heard rumors that they'd moved to a small apartment in the city. Their glamour dimmed. She felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a quiet gratitude that she'd found the strength to rise above it. One evening, as Eleanor sat on the porch of the lake house, a glass of wine in her hand, she thought about the woman she'd become. The locks she'd changed were more than metal, they were a declaration of her worth, her power, her right to define her own story. She'd lost a husband, but she'd gained herself. And that, she realized, was worth everything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the lake in shades of gold, Eleanor smiled. She was 72, and she was just beginning.